Get ready to get sticky. Hey everybody, welcome back to Sticky Situations. I'm your host Rachel, in case you forgot me, even though I'm pretty unforgettable, so even though I have a pretty forgettable name, but it's fine. My parents named me Rachel because I don't know why, actually. I think I asked them and they really just couldn't think of anything else, so they decided on Rachel, but maybe I'll have them on the podcast one of these days and ask them why exactly they named me Rachel. But for a pretty basic name, I have nothing close to basic personality, so yeah, you couldn't forget me. So welcome back to Sticky Situations. I hope you guys are ready for another great episode. Remember to follow us on whatever platform you listen on, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, whatever other platform there is that you might listen on that I have no idea, because what other platforms really are there? And if you're listening on Apple, remember to rate, review, and subscribe. Follow us on Instagram at Sticky Situations Pod. And I would say like us on Facebook, but I had to set up the Facebook page first. And there's going to be a TikTok coming too. So just look out for all of it. I'll advertise it. Instagram is going to be the place to get all of your information for now. But don't worry. I'm going to take the social media world by storm with this podcast. So just watch for it. Also, if you want to come be a guest on the podcast and tell your own dating stories, please feel free to DM me at Sticky Situations Pod on Instagram or send me an email at stickysituationspod@gmail.com. Also, if you want to date me or any of our guests, I am kind of looking to get into the shotgun business, so which is matchmaker for those of you who don't know what shotgun means. So please feel free to reach out. I will try my best, unless you're weird or creepy or bad. I don't know. We'll see. But feel free to reach out. As you can hear her laughing in the background at me. I have a special guest today. One of my really great friends, one of my buds. So without further ado, I guess I'll just introduce her. Everybody give a warm welcome to Naamah.
Hi guys, it's me. So I'm very excited to be here. Please, like Rachel said, continue to do everything you can to get the latest updates on our Sticky Situations podcast. Very exciting stuff. So I guess I just want to put a few things out there before we get started. The first is that this is going to be as on the record and non-anonymous as possible. The reason being, I hope that one day my work finds this, knows how hard my life is, and gives me a raise as a result. Secondly, I want all these dudes out there to know if they're a good guy or not. So if I ever dated you before, you can have yourself in mind during this podcast and think of if any of these stories ever applied to anyone you ever dated, and maybe one of them is about you, and hopefully you'll be getting a positive review and not a negative one.
Do you think that these guys realize that the stories that we tell about them are about them?
Well, that's a great question, Rachel. I think some of these, honestly, I think that's a great question. And from my lady's perspective, I think maybe I'm going to have to say no. I think a lot of these guys lack a lot of self-awareness, obviously.
Yeah, guys.
Hashtag not all men, but...
Yeah, not all men. Some men are good.
Some men are good.
But, men who are listening, you need to be more self-aware. Some of these stories might be about you. I had a funny idea for the podcast, which I'm still toying around with, of having guys that I previously dated on. And then when, I talk about dating stories, I'll tell the bad stories of when I dated them. Maybe not bad, but I'll tell the story of when I dated them and see if they realize that it's them. I've been advised not to do this, but...
It would be pretty hilarious.
It would be funny, but I don't think any of them would realize that it was them.
Right, they probably wouldn't, honestly. I feel like men, why don't you write in? Write into the podcast. Rachel gave you the email. And tell us, what do you think of the ladies? Do you think the ladies have self-awareness?
Or and come on the podcast, too.
And come on the podcast, but also Tell us. What do you think that the women out there are as oblivious as you are? I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, I
don't think so.
I do have some men in my lineup for future guests. Like, I have my list of my lineup for episodes to come. So get excited for all of that. And there are some men in there, so maybe I'll ask them. Yeah, that'll be a guy question.
I think that's a great question. I think it's a great question.
And we're not trying to bash men because,
no.
Also, like, unfortunately, we're heterosexual, so we have to, like, marry one of you one day, hopefully. But
we want to marry one of the good ones.
We want to marry one of the good ones, but we also, like, okay, bad ones are bad ones. I think people can change, but only to some extent. People can grow. But if you're in that stage where you're just, like, don't know, we're just helping shape you. And you should take our advice.
Yeah. Yeah, you said it, Rachel.
Okay, so Naamah, let's hear some more about you. Can you tell me your age, relationship status, and where you live?
So I live in New York City. I am in my lower 30s, and the last question was relationship status. I am happily single, very happily single, so thank you.
I like how you phrase that because, like, a lot of people will say happily married, happily in a relationship. But, like, I feel like everyone says, like, oh, when you're single, you're not happy.
You know what? This is my default state of being. I came into this world single, and I may go out of this world single if I have a partner who dies before I do. So, you know what? You gotta get used to it.
It's true. Also, like, everyone's like, you can't be happy when you're single. But I think you can. I mean, my default is not happy. Like, even when I was in a relationship, I wasn't happy about something. Right. I really don't think... I was actually having this conversation with a different friend because she was telling me, she's like, I feel like my life is just too good right now. Like, there has to be a catch. And I'm like, no, it's not. You still have so much bad stuff in your life. And I didn't say this as like, oh no, your life sucks. But I was just like, no, certain aspects of your life are really good right now, and that's making you happy and hiding some of the bad stuff. But nobody's life is perfect. So, like, when you're thinking it's too good to be true, just remember that your life probably still sucks in some capacity.
Oh, wow. That is encouraging.
Yeah. I like to think that I have some words of wisdom.
Yes, you do. Thank
you. Guys, I'm not
that,
depressed.
Rachel.
Don't worry.
You know, I'm not going to say my life is, like, you know, super happy and all that, and I'm always happy. But you know what? I'm single now, so I think I may as well embrace it and just, you know,
and enjoy it.
Enjoy it and roll with it and find the funny in it. And that's exactly what we're doing right now.
That's the purpose of this podcast.
So,
Naamah. I don't know if you have a story you wanted to start with, or I'll ask you for your basic, like, worst date story. We'll save your best date story. I think with the last guest, we did best date last. Unless you want to say the good first and then keep the worst or bad stories for last. It's up to you. I'll give you the freedom of choice.
Wow. I think, well, as far as, like, worst date, like, you know, some dates are bad. Some dates are bad. Some dates can be very enjoyable. It doesn't happen too often, but it does happen on a very nice and rare occasion. I would not say that my dates, I haven't been on any, like, crazy dates. Like, nothing, I tried to think about this in advance and, like, think about, like, what's been my worst date. Like, I've had some dates I really did not enjoy. They were not fun. They were boring. I didn't like the company. But I wouldn't say that I have, like, something super crazy. Like, you know, some people really have, like, these awful stories. And I wouldn't say that I have any awful stories, or maybe I just roll with whatever happens. So I don't, you know, nothing awful has ever happened on a date. So I could tell you about some, like, bad dates I've been on. And hopefully they entertain you.
We aim to entertain you.
So one story that was, well, this is pretty a pretty standard thing that tends to happen in my life is that I go on a date that's dull, there's no chemistry, and neither of us are really feeling it. And in most cases, my general approach to dating is that I usually, and I'm going to use the word usually, I'm not going to say always, because it's not always, but usually, I try to have the mindset that I will give a second date if the guy asks me out on a second date. Because I feel like it's, it's just nice to give it a chance and see if maybe the first date was just like, we just
I do the same.
didn't work out.
Unless
too
he's
well.
like really off.
Right, unless the guy's like very off.
Or like something happened.
Or something happened, or in rare circumstances, I just really don't want to go out again. And this story that I'm about to say is one of those stories. Now, okay, so usually what happens is when I go on one of these dates that I'm like, okay, I guess if I have to go out again, I'll go out again. And if I don't, then I don't. Then typically the guy doesn't want to go out again either. And I'm kind of absolved of having to make the decision on my own. Was this date bad enough that I'm going to cut it off at the first date? Or was it okay enough that I will suffer through another episode? So usually I'm relieved because those guys that I don't have a good time with, they usually also feel the same way apparently, because they also say that they don't want to go out on a second date. And that's just fine and dandy. But then, here in this story, that did not happen. So I went on a date with the guy. It was very, very boring. I did not think at that time that I had ever met anyone so boring in my entire life. He was a nice guy. He took me to a nice restaurant that everybody goes on many dates to. I shall not name the restaurant. But we went on to a nice restaurant, and the date was just boring. It was just a very boring date. And it was just exceptionally boring because, typically I feel like, okay, I'm willing to suffer through a second date, even though this first date was not good. Anyhow, everybody has their own dating standards. I'm just gonna preface it with that. Everybody has their own dating standards, and some people like to be driven, picked up and driven home. And I would say I'm not of that type of mindset. I do like being picked up sometimes, but I'm also willing to meet the guy. I'm willing to take my own transportation home. Some people say that's a safer option, just FYI, guys. So you should know that some people do feel it's not safe to rely on the guy for his transportation because he could attack you in the car. You never know. So I'm just going to put that out there. It may be the safer option.
Yeah, we talked about this in, I don't know what order I'll release the episodes, but we did go into detail about this. I had a friend who, luckily it wasn't dangerous, it was just more uncomfortable. He drove her to his car. No, he drove her to her car, and, he just got kind of handsy, and she's like, whoa,
right.
No, read the room.
Right.
And she, jumped out and then ended up walking many blocks. She's like, oh, my car's right here. And then walked, a million blocks.
Oh, my gosh. See, that's what I'm saying. So, but other people feel safer if the guy picks them up and drives them home. Anyway, in this case...
I think it depends what date number it is and how you met this guy.
Oh, interesting. That's an interesting point.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, at that time, I happened to be working in the city, and I went, and I did not live in the city at that time, and I went back home. My father picked me up at the bus stop after, I got home. He had known that I had been on a date after work, which is why I was getting home later than I typically got home from work. And he asked me how was the date. I said it was very, very boring. And he said, oh, I'm sorry to hear that. I said, yeah, I just really don't want to go out again. But I feel like if the guy asks me out again, like maybe I should. He's like, no, if you had such a bad time and you really don't want to go out again, then there's no reason to go out again. It's okay not to. I was like, oh, phew, I don't have to say that I must go out with him again. So, anyhow.
You never have to go out again.
No, you're right. Ladies, bear that in mind. You never have to go out again. But, I felt like some kind of level of, wanting to give it a fair shot. And I was like, well, maybe I'm not giving it a chance. Anyway, as soon as I got home, the shadchanit had texted me and said, oh, he had a really nice time. He wants to go out with you again. And I was like, oh, no. So I was like, okay, I'm not going to say yes or no right away. I'm going to just ask if I could think about it. So I texted her back. I'm like, hi, is it okay? I'm not sure yet. It's just very, soon after the date. Can I think about it and let you know? She said, okay, sure. Just let me know as soon as possible. Anyway, next morning, first thing I get texted, oh, what's the story? Do you want to go out again? I'm like, oh gosh, okay. But I said, you know what? I had already made up my mind that I didn't want to. So I just texted her and said, no, thank you so much for everything, but no, I don't think that I do want to go out again. So she said, okay, that's okay. So I guess she relayed the message. Later that afternoon, I got a text message, and it was this guy, and he said, hey, do you have a minute to talk? I was at work, so I did not respond to his text message. Then about maybe 45 minutes later, I get a second one hey, haven't heard back from you. Do you have a minute to talk? Can I call you? I was still working. I mean, it was 2 in the afternoon or 3 in the afternoon. I don't know exactly. I was still at work, so I was so I just didn't respond. I didn't really want to talk to him right then and there, and I didn't really see why this was a matter of any urgency, so I didn't text him back. And anyway, get a third text from him. I guess this was probably around the time that I was leaving work. So I was like, he's like, oh, hey, can I call you now? Is that okay? So I was like, well, okay, I guess. I don't know. I don't really remember. I remember he called me, and he's like, hi, how come you don't want to go out again?
Oh my God.
We had such a nice time. It was a really nice date. I was like, it was very, I tried to be diplomatic about it. I was like, yeah, it was very nice. I just don't see it going anywhere. I just didn't really feel that we had, that much in common. So I just didn't really feel that we should move forward. He's like, but what was wrong with the date? I talked about my day, you talked about your day.
Was this guy, socially off?
Well, yeah, he was. I think he was desperate. It was more that he was desperate, I think. He was 26 years old from, the shadchanit had described him as having a Haimisha family. I guess from a Haimish family.
Which means, a more, for those of you who aren't familiar with the terminology, it's more in the more observant circles, more, they get married much younger, have a lot of babies.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. He was from a Haimish family. She said they're very down-to-earth people. They're not they're not necessarily looking for him to marry the most religious girl, just somebody who's nice and, whatever, and somebody religious, and but his family background was Haimish. Maybe he had most of his friends were married, most of his siblings who were of age were married. So I think it was more a matter of some desperation, and but he was a little socially off. I mean, that was part of the whole thing here, why maybe I didn't really want to continue with him. Was that yeah, he was a little bit socially off. What are we going to do? So he's like, we had such a nice time. You talked about your day. I talked about my day. It was so nice. I'm like, I'm like, I wasn't feeling it. I just don't really want to go out with you again. And he kept like going on and on. He's like, but why can't you just give me another chance? I just don't see why we can't just go out on another date. Like, all right, like, seriously, dude, like, honestly, this is just weird. This is just weird, and it's a little bit desperate and sad. So I was like, I was like, no, I told you how I feel. Like, I'm sorry, I'm going to go now. So that was the end of that. I hung up, and no second date to this guy.
Also, I think it's weird when people, like, push for a reason why.
Yeah, it was very strange.
Like, I never push for a reason why.
Right, exactly. I
don't want to know why I'm being rejected.
Occasionally I have asked, especially when I was, like, very early on in dating, and I didn't know what to expect. I wasn't sure if, I just wanted more information and more feedback at that stage. After I asked a bunch of times, I realized I'm not going to get any answers from this, so it's kind of a stupid question. But yeah, that was part of it. I was like, I was like, what are you asking me, like, the reason why for? Like, I was trying to be polite. I was trying to be diplomatic, just say, like, I just wasn't feeling it. I just wasn't, I didn't say that at first. I only said that once he pushed me. I just said it was very nice. I just felt we didn't have that much in common. I was like, like, if you want to know why, like, maybe you can talk to the Shadchanit about it, but I don't know why you're calling me and asking me, for this direct information directly. I just don't feel like I have to, explain myself to you, like, why I didn't want to go out again. Like, it was just very strange and awkward.
Yeah, it's weird.
So that was one weird situation that I had. And then another story that I have that's a much longer story. I call it the story of the last man on earth. This is a much longer story, and this is the second story I'll tell, and if we have time for a third story, maybe I'll tell a third story. So this is a story about coronavirus. So January 1st of 2020, New Year's Day, I went on a first date with a gentleman that a mutual friend had set us up. And we had a decent time. Was it the most amazing date I had ever been on in my life? No. Was it bad? Also the answer being, no, it wasn't bad. And unlike the first story, I was definitely very open to giving this guy another date. And yes, he asked me on a second date. Now, there was a little bit of a hitch here. This guy was in medical school a couple of hours away from where I lived. And, he was very busy with school, during the week. And for me personally, I actually, at that time, and like I said, this is going to be completely, or not completely anonymous, but this is going to be definitely non-anonymous enough that anybody who knows me is going to know this is me. And so I am a pharmacist by profession, and I did a lot of Sunday shifts at that time. So for me, my Sundays were not typically free. And just by the way, and Rachel, you can feel free to jump in and explain whatever you want to explain Jewish-wise here. But
okay.
The reason why I had to do so many Sunday shifts was in exchange for getting all my Saturdays off for Sabbath observance. And Rachel, if there's anything you need to explain here.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's basic. Friday night at sundown to Saturday night sundown is our Sabbath or Shabbat. So we typically, those of us who are Sabbath observant, who keep Shabbat, don't work, don't do electricity. We just chill. We go to the synagogue. We hang with our friends. We hang in the park.
Exactly. So
yeah, it's not a work day. So I had a point in my career where I was having to work weekends at some point, and the rest of my team and everyone else who I worked with worked Saturdays. Me and the other religious Jews worked on Sundays. It was great. So, yeah.
So there you go. That. So sometimes that's just how it is. And you know what? I mean, when I had started at that job that I had at that time, the company did not give me an easy time about being off on Saturdays. So they weren't like, oh, no problem, no worries, it's your religious day, so that's okay. They actually gave me a pretty hard time about it. I really was under a lot of pressure at that time to, do all my Sunday shifts and everything like that. And with his medical school and him, living so far away, I mean, he lived close enough. It's drivable, but it's a day trip. It's a full day trip to go back and forth from where he was. So we had a very hard time coordinating the second date. We had like maybe a couple of phone calls in between the first and second date, but then it wasn't until the middle of February that I actually did have a Sunday off where I was able to take the day and drive to see him. Now, some people might say that was mistake number one, but at that time, I saw my time as being more, I guess, less valuable than his time. Like, I was off. I don't
think it's necessarily less valuable. I think it's just like when you're in a situation like that. I mean, it's not the same, but when I was dating my ex-boyfriend, like he lived in New Jersey, I lived in the city, and just that part of that time of the year, he was so much busier with work than I was.
Right.
So I could leave a little earlier, and then by the time I got there, he could leave work and pick me up from the bus. Whereas, like, if he was coming to me, that was, like, an extra, like, hour and a half that we didn't get to, like, me going to him gave us an extra hour, 2 hours together.
Oh, wow. Okay. So I don't know if I had that exact calculation, but a very similar idea. I figured he needs the time to study, whereas, like, for me, if I was off for the whole day, I really was off, and I didn't really have that other responsibilities so that I really were that pressing that I had to take care of. So I felt that I could afford to take the day and go to where he was. At the time, I wasn't particularly bothered by it. It seemed like a reasonable decision. But I know some ladies out there, they have, an idea that, he should drive to you, especially early on.
I wouldn't do it on a first date.
They're not necessarily wrong. He did come to me on the first date, but again, the first date was January 1st, so he was off from school at that time. So, it was a little bit easier for him than, at this point when his semester was in full swing. So, whatever. That's what I chose to do. It seemed like the right decision at the time. Maybe it still was the right decision. Anyway, I drove to him. We spent a few hours together and, in his hood over there, wherever that may have been. And, it was nice. Like, I had a decent time. I mean, he was a quieter dude, so it wasn't like we spent so much time, like, conversing or like, I didn't feel like we got like super connected, that we had like the best connection or the greatest conversations. I just figured, he's a quieter dude and like, some dudes are harder to draw out than other dudes, and ain't nothing wrong with that. Ain't nothing wrong with that. Different strokes for different folks and all that. So, I, it was a decent time. I wasn't regretful of the day. I felt that it, had gone fine. And, again, like, had he wanted to go out on another date, like, I would have been open to it. So, anyway, but after that, I did not hear from him for 3 whole weeks. Which, if he had, it's not just about the fact that he didn't ask me out again. Like, I drove all the way to where he was, which was about a 2-hour trip each way. And, I took my whole day off to come visit him. I felt that the least he could do was at least text me, do you want to go out again? Or, like, I had a nice day, but, like, I don't really see this going anywhere, so, thanks so much, but, thanks, I'll, have a nice life. But, like, didn't hear nothing from him. Finally, about 3 weeks later, he gets in touch with me. He texts me, like, hey, what's up? I'm like, what's up? Like, where have you been, mister? Like, why are you just texting me, like, out of the blue? Like, it seemed like you had ghosted me. He's like, oh, no, I didn't ghost you. I just was really, really busy. I was like, too busy to just send a quick text message. He's like, well, what about you? How come you didn't text me? I'm like, dude, firstly, I came all the way to see you. The least you could do is, like, at least acknowledge that fact and, like, get in touch with me after the date. And secondly, in our community, like, the guy is supposed to do a lot of the work, especially early on, and that's just how it is. And maybe
women like to be pursued.
Like, why am I going to be chasing after a guy? And honestly, the truth is, I'm going to be honest with you guys too. There have been other situations where I didn't hear from the guy for a few days, and I was interested in a second date or a third date or whatever, didn't hear from him. And I did text him and say, like, hi, like, I haven't heard from you, but, like, it would be, I had a nice time. Like, would you be interested in going out again? Like, actually, I have done that before. Yes. And honestly, it never worked in my favor. Usually, if they ghosted me, it was because they didn't want to see me again.
Exactly. It goes back to my rules, everybody. We'll get to those at the end, which also, I think, Naamah, you just gave me rule number 4.
What? Okay. I'm ready. Or are we not? We're saving it for the end.
Oh, I mean, you already know my rules because I've said it all to you now. Rule number 1, if he likes you, you'll know.
Right.
If he doesn't, you'll be confused.
Yes, I'm completely I completely agree with that.
Rule number 2, if he wants to, he will, which all of these apply to this situation.
Yes.
Number 3, only reciprocate. And number 4, no chasing.
Yes, ma'am.
No chasing.
No chasing, that's right. And that applies to dude number 1 too, who we already talked about. So, anyway, my point is, well, that never worked in my favor anyway. So I was like, dude, you know how it is. Like, the dude's supposed to make the move. The guy is supposed to do it. Like, he's like, okay, yeah, maybe this was my bad and all that. I'm sorry. I'm like, okay, like, I'm willing to be understanding. And, like, I do realize, because I was in pharmacy school, and I'm not going to say that pharmacy school is equally as hard to medical school, because it probably isn't, but it is comparable in difficulty to medical school at the very least. And I'm sure that when I was in pharmacy school, it would have been hard for me to maintain a relationship. So it's not like I have no frame of reference and I don't understand. So I'm willing to understand, but I'm also not willing to, be, or maybe I am willing, because you'll hear the rest of the story. I didn't think I was willing to be, neglected like that. So I was like, okay, fine, just please don't act like that again. Anyway, the same situation, the same circumstances that made it hard for us to have a second date also made it hard for us to have a third date. But then, March 2020 happened, Corona days happened, and it probably made it hard for anyone, anywhere, to have any dates. So, actually, this probably worked out a lot better, because we were able to have some phone calls and video chats and text chats and all that without the pressure of having to try to plan around a date. And I thought it seemed to be going pretty nicely. Like, it seemed like we were, rolling, and it was cool, and and I was just like, well, I have to make it work with this guy. He's the last man on earth. He's the last man on earth. And that's how I viewed him. I'm like, after this guy, nobody normal is going to be left. And the only guys that are going to be left are going to be, like, guys 10 years older than me. And I'm just going to have to settle. So I better just make it work with this guy. Am I crazy about him? No. But he's nice, and I like him, and he's, pleasant, and I had a decent time talking to him. I was like, fine, he's the last man on earth. It's got to work. Anyway. So we carry on like this for a few months, because it's the Corona times and everybody's doing the long distance dating and all that. Now, did we have were we texting constantly? Were we talking every night? No. I figured part of it has to do with the fact that he's very busy in medical school, and my personality is not the kind of person that wants to talk for hours and hours on the phone every night anyway. So honestly, I wasn't like, oh man, like, gosh, I wish, like, he called me all the time. Like, we don't talk on the phone enough. Like, I wish it was more frequent and more often. Like, you know, like, I was okay, I think, with the frequency at which we were talking. I think it should have been a little bit more often. But, like, you know, I was like, well, he is busy. He is in medical school. I do understand. He probably has a lot of things to do. So, you know, this is working out okay. Anyway, we carry on like this for a few months. The summer, things start clearing up a little bit. You know, it seems like maybe all the restrictions that we had seemed to be, you know, relaxing a little bit. COVID was not as crazy at that time, and people were, you know, starting to like re-engage with the world. I'm like, listen, it's July. You know, I think maybe it's time that you can come, you know, make another visit over here to see me. He's like, yeah, but my medical school wants me to quarantine before I go on rotations. I was like, okay, like, I'm willing to hear that. If your medical school wants you to quarantine, then I guess that's fair. Then you should quarantine. You know, but then he started telling me how he was going to be going to the supermarket and doing this and doing that. I was like, it doesn't sound to me like you're quarantining. Like, if you're, you know, if you're going out. He's like, yeah, but like, I need groceries. Like, everybody was ordering their groceries from home at that time. Like, you, if you really were serious about quarantining, like, quarantine. If not, not. Like, otherwise, like, you know, we don't have to go to like a very like enclosed space. You know, we could, you know, try to act socially distant and all that, but we should still have an in-person date. If you're not quarantining, like, all you have to do is get in your car, drive to me, and, you know, we'll be socially distanced once you get here. And
you can go outside.
We could go outside, like, you know, he's like, oh, okay. Anyway.
I dated someone during that summer. Like, I went out with someone that summer, and it was pretty, I mean, I was in his car, but we wore masks.
Right, it's doable. It was, like, at that point, it wasn't, people were meeting in person again. They were trying to socially distance and all that, but there were ways of doing it at that point. People were doing it. You know, if he was really doing a full quarantine, I would have been, you know, very understanding. But I was like, this doesn't sound like a full quarantine that you're doing anyway. So at least, you know, don't be a hypocrite. Anyway, finally, then he starts sending me, you know, messages like this. Hey, do you think we should maybe put things on hold? I was like, well, what, like, why would we do that? Do you want to, like, end things, or do you want to just, like, why would we put things on hold? Like, if you're trying to end it, like, let's just end it. He's like, no, I don't want to end it. I just thought maybe you would prefer if we end it because, like, you know, it's been kind of hard. I'm like, you know, no, I'm open to doing this corona dating, like, long distance thing. Like, you know, I just do think that sometimes maybe we can make some time to see each other. He's like, oh, okay, all right. I was just trying to, you know, I just thought it might be, you know, better for you. I was like, well, you know, right now it's not better for me. No, it's not. You know, I was like, this is the last man on earth. I have to make it work with him. And we just have to, you know, stick together until we finally get married, and that's that. But anyway, we had a date in person. I thought it was nice. We had a nice day, I thought. Maybe, I don't know. You know, but again, the same old problems. Now, new excuses were coming along, and I'm not going to go into that too much because some of them were a little bit strange. But he started making some new excuses, and, you know, why he wasn't in touch and this and that. And I, you know, again, he asked me, do you want to put it on hold? And again, I said, like, you know, what would be the purpose? Do you want to end it, or are you looking, you know, just to put it on hold for putting it on hold's sake? He's like, no, it's good. We don't need to put it on hold. I was like, okay. But, you know, hearing from him less and less and less, and just getting more and more frustrated, him not calling when he would say that he would call, you know, he was, you know, we said that we would, you know, discuss, you know, some of our issues, and then he would text me and say, I'm really not feeling well, and, you know, can we call next week? And then next week would come, oh, hey, I'm still not feeling well, you know, can we talk again tomorrow? And then tomorrow would come and go, and hear nothing from him. And at that point, I had already given up. I was like, this is over. Like, he's clearly not into it. Like, you know, he's not trying, and I don't know why he doesn't just end it if he wants to end it. And really doesn't make any sense at this point. But somebody offered to set me up with another person, so I was like, so I asked her, like, am I allowed to kind of go out with this other person? Like, I kind of am still seeing this other person, but like, he's been really flaky and I just don't know. She's like, no, just go out with this other guy.
Yes,
like,
always go out.
He won't.
If you have an opportunity to go out with someone, unless you are in a committed relationship, or you're like...
Well, I wanted to believe this was a committed relationship,
No, but like, you
Rachel.
know if it's committed. Like,
I genuinely did. I just
don't
wanted
know.
to believe that there were his personal issues that were making it challenging.
I think you're only exclusive when you say you're exclusive. Unless, okay, so like my ex-boyfriend, I told him, I'm like, we're exclusive. We're in a relationship. You're not seeing, if you're seeing anyone else, it's over. But like, okay, so you don't always have that conversation in the context of a relationship. Like, I dated a guy for a couple months after my ex, and like, I was only talking to him. I was only seeing him. But at the same time, like, it was just kind of like I mean, we did say it eventually. Like, we did have the conversation. But even at the beginning, it was just kind of unspoken. But I was also giving him all my attention anyway. Like, we talked on a regular basis. We went out. Like,
well, that's what I thought this was,
it wasn't
Rachel.
like weeks in between contact.
Well, I thought that's what this was. And I thought when there was a gap, it was just him, facing his own issues. And, it wasn't,
You give the benefit of the doubt.
I do. I try to give the benefit of the doubt. I'm too naive. That's my problem. Like, I believe people what they say. And, not everybody's as straight with me as I am with them. So I just, if somebody says something, I assume that they're telling me the honest truth. Why would I think that they would lie? If I gave them the opportunity to break up with me and I said, do you want to break up? And they said no.
Yeah.
Then why wouldn't I believe them, But obviously I was too naive and I was too trusting. And I guess maybe his mentality was like yours, Rachel, because a couple months later, well, anyway, that was the end of that. He just kind of ended it like this. He just said, okay, I think we should put things on hold right now. And I think I just said, like, listen, it's over, buddy, anyway. Like, don't even, this has been ridiculous for some time now or something like that. I never heard from him again. And anyway,
also, like, with what I was saying, like, you're not exclusive until you're exclusive, like, until you have the conversation. Usually, like, the conversation happens, like, if you're consistently seeing each other, like, the conversation should happen.
Well,
like,
I guess
like, not months and months later. It's like,
well,
maybe if you're seeing each other, like, once it's established that you're not, like, I don't know, I feel like when you're dating someone, there's a certain point where you stop going on, like, I stop waiting for him to ask me on dates and start waiting for him to ask me when we're seeing each other. Like,
right.
Like, it's different. It's like, I know we're still going to see each other. And I think that's the point where it's like, okay, I don't think we're seeing other people. Like, yeah. I personally just wouldn't be at that point with more than one person.
Well,
like a first, second date, okay.
Well, I thought that, we hadn't gone on that many dates, and it had been many months,
Yeah.
It had been.
But it's also like virtual dates.
Yeah, but it was
count,
virtual.
like,
I thought virtual dates would count.
Virtual
I
dates
the
do
fact that
count,
we had,
I think.
we had been, talking for over 6 months. I did think that it counted. I didn't know that we had to have an exclusivity conversation. But what I found out later, my friend called me and said, "Hey, Naamah, like, when did you and this guy end up breaking up?" I was like, it was around August time. It was in August. She's like, are you sure it wasn't in like June or July? I said, yeah, I know it wasn't in June or July. She's like, oh, okay, because I think actually he started seeing someone else like around June, and she just called me because we're from the same town. She thought I might know who he is, and she just wanted to see if I like knew anything about him and had any other information about him. And I realized based on the details that she gave me, it was the same guy. And they've been dating pretty seriously since June, and they're about to get engaged. And I was like, oh, wow. Like, I felt very lied to. I felt very, very upset that this guy, we had been dating for 6 months since January. In June, he started seeing another girl, or I guess, I don't know, whatever kind of seeing or not seeing. I don't know what their relationship was like. But He started with another person, and I guess maybe it's what you said, Rachel. He wasn't exclusive. We didn't have any kind of talk about exclusivity. I'm like, maybe the fact that he was so absentee, I should have taken it that way. But, I just, I don't know. I guess there were some things I was supposed to learn from this story, but all it did was make me mad, Rachel. That's all that happened.
I would have been furious.
All that happened was that it made me mad. And that was the end of that. And that's the story of the last man on earth. And, I hope if anyone's listening, I hope you take some lessons from this story. I don't really know what they are, but I hope you do.
I think it's like, don't string people along.
Don't.
It's better to reject someone than to string them along.
Oh, that's for sure. Yeah, that's 100% true. That's my point.
And be honest.
Yeah, just be honest. I just don't understand. Like, maybe he was uncomfortable to end it, but I asked him if he wanted to end it, and he said no. Like, why would you lie to me? Why would you lie? I don't think he wanted to end it. I think he wanted to date two people for a while, but I think it was wrong. I think, at that point, we had been dating long enough that it should have been exclusive. I mean, that's how I saw it, but,
Yeah, especially if, like, his excuses were, I don't have time for you.
Right,
I don't have time
that's the thing. I believed him genuinely, that he was in school, that he was very busy with school, and that, made things hard.
But, so here's also what I think. People are too busy. Like, people make time for what they want to make time for. Like, I get it because I've been in situations at work and, I'm an accountant. So I studied for the CPA exams. I worked my public accounting years, had my busy seasons. Like, it would have been very hard to date during those times. And, I usually, every year that I had busy season, I took a break from dating during those few months. COVID was a little bit easier because, I could still, nobody was actually, going out or anything. So it was I could still, swipe people on apps or talk to them or, have a phone call, late.
Right.
Or on the weekend. But, in-person dating was, very hard. But, you know what? If a great guy would have come along that I would have liked, I would have made time for him. And, he would have known outright, these are the times I can go out. Other than that, I'm so busy. I'm going to try to make time for you, and I'm doing my best. But, it's just hard. I think also communication is key. You need to be communicative. Even if you don't have time for someone, communicate to them.
Right, that's what I tried to ask him. Can you just be in touch with me more and whatever? He just said, yeah, sorry, I've just been super busy. And I don't know why I continued to take it. I should not have continued to take it.
I feel like, we all continue to take things that we don't deserve because we don't realize what we deserve. My ex, I dated him, during one of his busiest times of the year at work. And, he, other nights, he would call, we would usually only see each other, once or twice a week, depending on his week. Also, I had stuff going on, too. But when I saw him, he would give me the time. He's I'm leaving work early. We're going to spend time together. And then the other nights, I knew he was working late. He would call me sometimes while he was working if no one else was there. Or if he had to drive in between places, he would call me. He was in communication with me.
Right. Exactly. That communication. That's very important.
Yeah.
That's very important. And unfortunately, that was very much lacking in this situation. But you know what? Oh, so my friend asked, should I tell him that I think he was, already dating you when they started dating? I said, look, I don't think you need to tell her that. If they're happy together, they're happy together. And, he's not necessarily, he wasn't abusive. He wasn't a bad guy. And maybe, obviously, he liked this woman better than he liked me. And he was obviously willing to, give her more than he gave me. And I guess I wish them a good life together. I don't see the point in, making things bad between them. So, no, there's no need to say anything of that nature. But I was very, very mad about, the way that I was treated. I was very angry. And the last story I have is a little bit funny. The last story I have is a little bit funny. This story happened a long time ago, too. Okay. So this last story is kind of funny. Short little story. Basically, I had my friend said she knew this guy. He was really sweet. He was really kind. He was good looking. He had some interesting opinions she thought I would enjoy discussing with him. So I was like, cool, set it up. So she set it up. We set out a date. We were going to meet somewhere in the city. Well, it's going to become obvious in a minute around where we were meeting. But anyhow, meeting somewhere in the city. And anyhow, I get to the destination and I get a phone call. The guy is on the phone. He says, hey, is it okay if we reschedule for another time? I just can't get there. There was a fire in the subway station. I just can't get there. I'm really not going to be able to come today. And mind you, I was already there. But anyhow, I was, as we already discussed, I'm way too trusting and nice. So I said, okay, no problem. Where we were, it was around the Central Park area because I was like, all right, let me walk around the park. And, I'll just have a nice little walk by myself at least since I'm here. So I walked into the park and I saw a very long line of people. And I was like, hey, what are you guys all waiting here for? They're like, oh, we're waiting to see if there's any extra tickets to go to Shakespeare in the park. So I was like, oh, man, that's too bad because I knew with such a long line, I was not very likely to get a ticket myself. So I was like, all right, I'm not waiting in this line. I'm going to move on. And then they called me back. They're like, hey, this person who was just supposed to be part of our group just, canceled at the last minute. We have an extra spot. Do you want to join us? I was like, yeah, that would be awesome. So anyway, I got to go with this random family to Shakespeare in the Park. So we did that. That was cool. But anyway, the guy and I, we did go on a date the following week. It was not good. He did not ask me out on a second date. And then a few years later, I found out he's gay. And nowadays, he's married to a dude. So that's the end of that story. And
which is all for the best. We are allies here.
We
I'm
are.
glad it didn't go well. And, best of luck to him.
Yes, best of luck to him. I'm glad he didn't marry me, just so that he could... for show. Thank God.
Yeah. We're glad that he is who he is. And he's married to someone
This is not a homophobic story. It's just supposed to be funny.
It's just funny. I think it's funny.
So I did want to give some advice.
Your dating advice. Some
dating advice. So here's some advice that I was given as a woman. I was told, let the guy lead the conversation. If there's an awkward silence, let the guy fill in this awkward silence. I kind of like that idea. But
I'm really bad at that. I talk a lot.
There's a lot of problems with that. A, I'm bad at it because the silence gets awkward. And B, at the point where you get to that awkward silence, the guy doesn't try to fill in the silence. What he actually does is say, okay, so should we you think we should head back now? That's how the silence gets filled in, not oh, wow, she's so mysterious and intriguing. I'd love to get to know more about her. let me ask her more questions.
Think any guy has ever referred to me as mysterious because I just keep talking.
Well, that was kind of the point, was to try to develop this aura of mystery. Where
I don't think I'm capable.
Let me ask her something more. I just so intrigued. I just need to learn more. But
honestly,
alas,
it
did not work.
Unless it's a bad date, I feel like I don't have that issue with awkward silences. If I'm vibing with someone, the conversation keeps going, or he does ask me a question.
Well, that's awesome because I guess
I fill the silence.
There you go. Well, that's why I'm happily single, Rachel.
I'm single too, Naamah.
Haven't vibed enough. I've been on a few vibing dates where so this is, this is not hashtag not all men.
Yeah, not all men. There are good ones.
There are a few nice men out there who really do put in the effort. But now here's my advice for the men. Put in the effort. If there's an awkward silence, maybe instead of just being okay, let's just head home now. Maybe you can actually try to think of something to say. Maybe even ahead of the date. Maybe think of some questions you might want to know or ask or learn about the person. You know.
Yeah, that's a good idea, having some stuff prepared ahead of time.
Yeah, just think about it. Think about what kinds of things you'd like to know. Like, you know, they could just be stupid questions. They could be questions about, you know, just job, life in general, you know, anything. But, like, you know, have some things ready. Like, you know, it's so easy to just, like, you know, turn off the date and just be like, all right, like, you know, it's an awkward silence. Like, let's leave now. Like, hey.
No, and girls like when guys shows an effort, even if it's like an awkward silence and he's like, okay, and then like is a question.
Yes,
I'll
it's
tell
so
you guys,
nice. It's so nice.
So I dated someone, and it was like one of the COVID surges, and so we went on one date in person, and then we both kept having COVID exposures. So we had our next 3 dates over video call. So, like, sometimes, like, you know what? Video call is not the same as in person. Unless you're talking to, like, your really close friend.
Right.
It's not the same as
100%.
in person. And it's, like, it's more prone to awkward pauses. So, each time, he was like, okay. What? And he had, like, little fun, like, not, kind of, like, game ideas, like, we could, like, do to get to know each other. And I'm like, this is cute. He's like, sorry if this is really nerdy or whatever. I'm like, no, this shows me
nice.
that
He
you
wants
are
to get to know
you. This shows me, like, okay, yeah, like, how long did we last playing the games? Because then we get onto a topic of conversation.
But that's the whole
point.
That's the whole point, is to, like, you know, actually, like, you know, bond and get to know each other.
Girls like a guy who puts in the effort. And, like, I feel like we talked about this I talked about this with Shayna, my previous guest, and, like, well, I don't know what order the episodes are going to air, but, like, a guy who puts in the effort, the guy who asks what area is convenient for you for the date, the guy who, like, comes up with a plan for the date,
Amen,
offers
sister.
to pick you up and drive you home, whether that's safe or not, that's up to your judgment. But things like that, like thoughtfulness. Really, girls just want some thoughtfulness.
Exactly. Yeah, it's just so easy to, like, you know, just check out and tune out. But, like, why don't you maybe you could really get to know somebody well. But at the same time, obviously, if you're not vibing, and that's that. But, like, you know, sometimes I just think the checkout is just too easy, I think. Like, I know for me, like, you know, do I go on a date and vibe with everybody? No, but I know that I do try to ask questions. I was told to try to ask less questions and maybe let the guy ask more questions. But as I said, alas, I don't know how well that strategy has worked yet. But guys, let it work. Let it work. So that's it for me.
Well, Naamah, one thing that I ask all my guests that you have to tell me is your Real Housewives tagline.
So my Real Housewives tagline is, don't date the last man on earth.
It's a good tagline, Naamah. It's a good tagline. So, everybody, thank you to Naamah for being my guest. If you're interested in dating Naamah, please reach out. Again, you can, or me, or anyone else who I've had on this podcast, or if you want to be a guest on this podcast. I'm also toying with the idea of, like, answering dating advice questions. So, if you want to date anyone, if you want to be a guest, or you have advice questions, please either DM Sticky Situations Pod on Instagram or send an email to stickysituationspod@gmail.com.
And thank you, Rachel, for coming up with this awesome idea for such a fun podcast.
Of course. I hope everyone else is enjoying listening. It's only, like, Naamah's great. Like, Naamah I knew, like, had to be one of my first friends on. But, like, I have a great lineup of friends. I have some great friends with some great stories. And so keep tuning in. And remember the rules, which are now 4 rules of dating. If he likes you, you'll know. If he doesn't, you'll be confused. If he wants to, he will. Only reciprocate. And rule number 4 that we just came up with today,
Don't pursue.
Yes, no chasing.
No chasing. That's right, sister. And peace out from me, and all the best to you.
Thanks for tuning in. Bye, everyone.